Welcome to our daily reflection for this Monday, August 25th. And today we hear of Paul and his writing to the Thessalonians. And Paul really becomes a model for evangelization. He is the great evangelist, really. And he shows us the key ingredient to evangelization when it comes to sharing the good news with someone else. And what does that really take? And Paul shows us the kind of, I think, the secret sauce, so to speak, when he writes to the Thessalonians and he says, "We give thanks to God always for all of you, remembering you in our prayers, unceasingly." Now, Paul is interceding. He's praying for the Thessalonians all the time in all of his prayers. He's just a prayer warrior for them. Why? If you pray for somebody repeatedly, what an act of love. And that's really what is kind of the first principle of evangelization that we oftentimes neglect. And that is the first way to reach people, not the only way, but the first way is to pray for them. Now, of course, Paul doesn't simply pray for the Thessalonians. He actually goes there and he labors. And he's going to talk about that over the next few days of all the effort he made for them, living with them and caring for them. So there's all those other things that have to happen. But sometimes we get caught up and focused on all those other things and we forget to pray, which is a real act of charity. And so imagine, getting a letter from Paul and he's saying, "Oh, I'm praying for you all the time in my prayers." And you'd be like, wow, he really cares for me. And that's what we should be doing for those we're trying to give outreach to. So who in your life, is it a family member, neighbor, co-worker that you want to share the gospel with, that you want them to come to know the Lord better? Are you praying for them? Later this week, on Wednesday, we'll have the Feast of St. Monica. She had certainly as her prime target her son, her wayward son, Augustine, but she prayed for him quite a bit, and that helped win the grace. And so let's storm heaven, as St. Paul does here and models for us, as well as St. Monica. And then notice in this prayer, there's several things that Paul is going to mention that touch on really the three key elements of Christian living, the three key virtues of a Christian, and that will be faith, hope, and love. Those are what we call the theological virtues, because ultimately they are a means of imitating God, and they require divine grace. We need God's power to have supernatural faith, to have supernatural charity, and to have hope in God. We need God's grace to do that. And so notice what Paul says in this prayer. He says, we're remembering you in our prayers all the time, unceasingly calling to mind your work of faith and your labor of love and endurance in hope. Notice there's faith, hope, and love, those three great theological virtues. And so Paul he underscores those three characteristics because they're so essential to all of our Christian lives. They are the most important virtues for a Christian. And then what I think of as, of course, Thursday will be the feast, or after the Feast of St. Monica, Thursday will be the Feast of St. Augustine. So it's a big week here at the Augustine Institute as we think about it, as we approach our 20th anniversary celebrations, and we're just really excited about that. But Augustine himself said, whatever state in life you are, one cannot live without these three dispositions of the soul: to believe, to hope, and to love, right? And for Augustine, he's like, look, if we don't have these three dispositions of the soul, these three theological virtues, we can't live the divine life. We can't live life as we're called to live it to its full. And so let's spend some time reflecting on how Paul describes these three theological virtues, because they're so important for our life. Let's think about it. He talks about the work of faith. Are you working to increase your faith? Sometimes I think we think that faith is just something that we're going to get, we're going to catch like a cold, and we're going to have. But faith takes effort. It takes the study of faith. And so one of the things that the First Vatican Council talked about is that the more you study Scripture and God's providence, the more that there's evidence and credibility that God is ordering history, as well as, of course, creation. The more you see design in creation and beauty in creation, the more you reflect on the order of salvation history in Scripture, the stronger your faith gets. Have you taken the work of faith? Labor of love. It's laborious to love others, and we have to keep resolving to be patient, to be serving, and to care for and be attentive to the needs of others. That takes a labor, and we have to keep being renewed in that. And then the endurance of hope. Hope isn't what we don't see. And so we have to keep thinking about what God's promise is if we have faith and love. And then we look forward to what we don't already have, but we work towards it. And that's going to be really important. But that's going to take patient endurance to persevere in hope. And if we start to lose hope, it's because our perseverance and our endurance is going down. So we need to work at faith, labor at love, and endure in hope. Let's reflect on which one of those do you struggle with the most? And let's ask God to strengthen us in that particular area today. May the Lord bless and keep you.